In 1886, Vancouver Chinatown had about 90 Chinese residents living in the area of Carroll Street and Dupont Street, later becoming East Pender. By the 1890s, the community had over 1,000 Chinese residents. Many Chinese laborers were lured by BC's gold rush and the Canada Pacific Railway. Far too many lost their lives, helping to build our great nation. Despite racist policies, Chinatown continued to grow. By the end of the first decade of the 1900s, Chinatown covered about 4 city blocks: Canton Alley to the west, Hastings Street to the north, Kiefer Street to the south, and Westminster Avenue to the east. The crowding in Chinatown was eventually eased by new tenement buildings. Businesses were thriving. Buildings were designed with authentic Chinese features. Chinatown was self-contained and growing until the Exclusion Act of 1923. Over the next 10 years, the population dropped by half due to malnutrition, hunger, emigration, and death. The Depression worsened the situation and gave rise to gambling dens, prostitution, and opium smoking. Chinatown rebounded when local boys and girls grew up and contributed to the revitalization that occurred after 1945, due in part to the service record of Chinese Canadians. Obtaining the franchise and the right to vote meant that many war veterans could enter public office. Veteran Douglas Jung went on to become a MP for Vancouver Centre in 1957. On June 16, 1980, Parliament passed a motion recognizing the contribution made to the Canadian mosaic and culture by the people of Chinese background. This was the first official recognition of Chinese railway workers. Chinatown has influenced many people of all ages. Justice Randall Wong, married to former teacher Beverly Eng, with 2 daughters and 2 grandsons, is the epitome of Canadian success. He was the first Chinese-Canadian Crown Counsel in Canada. He was also the first Chinese-Canadian provincial and federal court judge appointed in Canada.
Well, this would be about almost 65 years ago. All the children were sent to Chinese language school after public school finished at 3 p.m. And we came from all over Vancouver, although most of us lived in the East End, and we would catch either the streetcar or the trolley down to Pender Street for classes starting at 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. My mother was a very forceful matriarch, and like most Chinese women, she provided the tribal glue for both sides of the families, and she entertained and welcomed relatives and friends to her house and provided decades of home-cooked meals. Our parents believed that we should learn Chinese because we may have to make our living primarily in Chinatown. And it was not until the late 1960s or the 70s that the young people started to obtain employment outside of Chinatown. My father's cafe, the Ovaltine Cafe, was only about a block away from Chinatown and around the corner of the police station and the provincial judges court. And many of my dad's patrons used to come in from the back of the police station through the alleyway and through the kitchen into the cafe. I worked there in my teens, and a little earlier actually, and I got to meet many of these policemen and the lawyers and the judges, and I think that influenced me with respect to a legal career. I was fortunate that when I got started, this is when articling positions became available outside of Chinatown, and I was one of the first to take that opportunity. And as a result, I was more involved as an advocate in the courtroom than as a solicitor or business lawyer. When one is involved in litigation as an advocate, then of course the natural progression and many times is to be considered for a judge. And I was fortunate that that offer was made to me because I was one of the first Chinese Canadian lawyers to venture outside of Chinatown. If it was not for the veterans, ethnic Chinese would not have obtained the voting rights. And it's because of them, when they return, this new world was created for us. And I was one of the fortunate ones and the early ones to have that opportunity, because these veterans were basically about a generation older than myself. And when they returned, it was difficult for them to obtain employment really outside of Chinatown or amongst Chinese people outside of Chinatown. And my generation basically was the first to have that opportunity. And we're very thankful to the veterans. And that's why to this day, I'm a keen supporter of the Chinese Canadian Veterans Group, although the numbers are getting less and less, but I love to see them and to hear them teach us about the past. My children and grandchildren, of course, have some fond memories of looking in at the shops, meeting the seniors in Chinatown, and enjoying their company in the restaurants. Well, if they can maintain the number of good restaurants in Chinatown, and also too, it's a good teaching experience when they go down Chinatown and they see all the seniors take the bus and they shop daily for their vegetables and their meats. And it reminds me very much like when I was a child. Back at the Chinese school, there was a man who did the barbecuing for all of the shops. And he used wood on his barbecue. And some of the children would go from the back of the school to his shop and help him chop wood, for which he'll give you a treat, a slice of barbecued pork. And those memories stay.
After World War II, veteran Peggy Lee married, had 4 children, and built a successful career in business while supporting community and political benefits. Her experiences in the Chinese Ambulance Corps had a profound effect on her life.
Well, I was in Prince Rupert. It was 1936. Dr. Sun Yat-sen was coming over to Vancouver, and my father supported them very much. So they put on the Rice Bowl and had Shirley Temple come up from California. It was the biggest event ever that happened in Vancouver. You know, she raised a lot of money, and she was such a darling. They all loved her. It was the YWCA that got us into the ambulance corps. They called us up and said they want to form a Chinese ambulance corps. And so I was actually the youngest one there. And even though they did pick me up to be an NCO, I didn't make a good NCO. My friend made a good one, because you have to teach them how to march. And I was going to march them right in the water. And I quickly said, halt. And about turn. Was I ever lucky? They had to follow. They all go in the water. But we did get a nice letter from Madam Chiang Kai-shek commending us on what we were doing. Our job was to patrol the streets and make sure everybody had all the blinds down, and we had to go into the houses, you know, to make sure that everybody had blackout. That was our job. See, Chinese were not allowed to do anything. After the war, they gave us a lot of recognition. They really did. But I must admit that I found being with the Women's Ambulance Corps was the highlight of my life, because it had me doing things that I wanted to do. I'm certainly very, very pleased that we have this recognition in Chinatown now and that we are looked upon as some human beings, you know. But what I really think is so interesting is the young people are getting involved. I was asked to go and speak to the schools. I became a firefighter. I became SOS. I took up, sliding down the fire pole. I did that too. You'll love it. But I am very, very happy that we formed the Chinese Military Museum because we open us to everything. When I see all these things happening, with the military, I'm so grateful that I am part of it.
In World War II, veteran George Chow survived some of the most pivotal battles in the Second World War. He was honored by the Dutch Prime Minister for his work in liberating Holland and has received numerous medals and honors.
Over 100 people, all veterans who spent time in Holland. We were in Nijmegen, we were in a static position. We were just waiting for the German border was not too far away, maybe 5-6 miles. And we were stationed, we were living in a house there that taken over from a Dutch policeman. Of course, he put all his storage stuff in one room, and we had the free of the other one. So we made good friends there. We landed in Juneau. We landed the day, the next morning, we didn't know that. We were from an area, I was with headquarters artillery. They were in charge of all Canadian artillery, that section, what you call it, two Army Group Royal Artillery. And from there, we moved forward, and we saw the bombers. They dropped their bomb, circling back to England. And as they left that, they opened the artillery barrage. All different types of guns. Must be hundreds of them, continuous. The convoy had already been blown to bits anyway. They still opened the barrage. I guess they figured the Germans had really dug in there. It was a pretty tough. So that was the day they bombed MacLean, and we opened artillery. That was the day that we landed the day before. I had volunteered for the Far East, which they're still fighting Japan in those days. So we volunteered. So they gave us leave to go back to England. And when they went back to England, the day the war was over. The war was over in Europe. So they said, okay, don't unpack. You're going back to Britain. They're going to send us down to Kentucky to train for the Far East to fight the Japanese. While we were there, they dropped the bomb, so the war was over. I was invited to go to Ottawa, be one of the members. There was 404 members of the unit that went over. We had school children come up visit us, A lot of the students over there didn't realize there was Chinese in the army. They didn't know that. This is back in Ontario. And I think we had 3 different groups. They were very, very ignorant of the fact that the Chinese were in the army. But I was very fortunate as far as the discrimination. The group that I joined up with, there was a battery of over 250 people there. And I never had any problem. Maybe they talked behind my back, I don't know. But directly, I never had any problem at all.
The heart and soul of Chinatown is best represented by the people who work in the community, ensuring that the Chinese-Canadian culture is a legacy for all Canadians.
Chinese Cultural Center actually, is more than just important to Vancouver. In fact, together with the Sun Garden, it's very unique in North America. And we don't have anything like this together in whole North America. Sure, in Portland you got the Rose Garden, there's in there, and in Montreal you have a garden in there, but it's inside the park. And also too, in New York, there's supposed to be a garden there, but it's inside a building. So it's very, very unique for the whole of North America to have the Chinese Cultural Center and also the garden together in Chinatown. When they start building, we had 57 workers from China and all the stones and so on from China. So, you know, it's very, very unique in North America. Every weekend, hundreds of people in there playing table tennis, playing mahjong and dance and choral groups and so on and so forth, and kung fu. And that's why, you know, it's very, very unique. And this is why we got Chinatown, part of Chinatown, designated as a national heritage site.
I think it brings back all the history that the older generation and the previous generation of Chinese people have worked, you know, including the veterans and railway workers and all the people who come to Canada and try to help build this country. And we are so grateful that we are able to, you know, live in this wonderful place, able to, you know, participate in like different professions, in the elections. A lot of the rights that we have and we take for granted was actually, you know, fought by previous generations of Chinese Canadians. Well, right now I'm serving as a bridge, so to sort of work together with our established and senior members in the community and try to attract young people to join and spark the interest that you know, you can have a career and then you can work very hard with your work, but at the same time you can serve the community and sort of build and maintain our culture. Chinatown is not just for Chinese people, I believe. I think it's for everybody in Vancouver, everybody in Canada, but at the same time I think there's enough, that we need to have enough Chinese people there to sort of preserve, especially with the families and the different clans. So it's better, it's good to have them to tell the story, to educate everybody.
When I was really young, I remember holding my grandma's hand and just walking in on Chinese New Year, and then we came down to see the parade, and there were lion dancing, there were a lot of food, a lot of different people, and I think that's really important for Vancouver, just because the Vancouver citizens really embrace multiculturalism and diversity in Vancouver, and that's really important not only for Canadian Chinese, but also for other cultures as well. So I joined St. John Ambulance when I was in grade 5, so this is going to be my 9th year in September. In the beginning when I joined St. John, it was actually because of my parents. When I was really young, I was really shy, so they wanted me to meet new people, but once I joined the program, I learned a lot of different leadership skills. And a lot of people think St. John is only about first aid, but that's not true. It's about leadership, teamwork, and just meeting new people in general. And I really like helping others, so it was a really good opportunity to do so.
A lifetime filled with teaching, performing, and publishing books promoting Cantonese opera history have enriched the Canadian cultural landscape. At 101 years old, he is still actively promoting this ancient art form. Chinatown supported many artists such as Sifu Wangtao, whose 40-year career as Canada's first Cantonese opera music professor has brought him international recognition.
因為嗰陣時振華星從中國嚟加拿大做戲嘅啫。
Sifu Wangtao speaks about the earlier days of the Jinhua Sing Musical Association. At that time, they were the only organization able to invite opera artists from China to perform in North America. These artists would bring many costume pieces over from China for their performances. They took their best pieces along with them to tour in the United States and left their remaining costumes at the Jinhua Sing Musical Association. Over the course of 20 years, the association had collected 8 crates of leftover costumes brought by these artists. They asked Sifu Wangtao to review them.
邊啲好嘅？原來嗰啲人去美國咧，佢係帶咗啲咩嘅，就剩翻啲舊嘅。
Sifu Wang Tao selected 100 high-quality pieces from the 8 crates to donate to the University of British Columbia through 2 Cantonese-speaking friends. In the following 50 years, more selections from the remaining costumes were chosen for donation, amounting to a total of 570 pieces.
即同我做朋友呢，我帶佢上去睇，我送咗100件俾佢。
In return for these gifts, UBC provided the Jinhua Sing Musical Association with a monetary contribution of $3,000, which the association used to purchase new performance
俾
costumes.
翻3000蚊加拿大紙，振華星將呢3000蚊買過啲new one，啲新嘅。
Sifu Wang Tao is now a consultant on the costumes displayed at UBC, explaining their rich histories to inquiring visitors.
總共570幾件。
Many of these costumes were inlaid with gold and silver thread, a craftwork which is no longer seen today.
金絲銀字，價都唔變。咁啊，所以佢啊俾咗個顧問俾我，叫我凡有人去參觀呢，解釋俾人聽。
Carol Lee is the co-founder and CEO of Linacare Cosmetherapy, based in Chinatown in the building that her grandfather purchased over 80 years ago. Carol, like her father and grandfather, are well known for their philanthropy and business works in Vancouver. She is strongly committed to the revitalization of Chinatown.
My grandfather was considered one of the pioneers of Chinatown, and a lot of our family events took place in Chinatown. I spent a lot of time as a young girl going to Chinese school here, going to church, Chinese kindergarten, and after kindergarten, we had a store here. So on this space, 127 East Pender, we had somebody working here. So my aunt worked for my grandfather. They had a sort of a dry goods store, and I used to come here after school, and I would play, and I had such fond memories. I mean, back then it was very different. It was a very vibrant place. It was very alive. Lots of people. There was a lot of hustle and bustle, a lot of businesses, a lot of restaurants, lots of things going on. There was a lot of laughter and joy, people walking up and down the streets. It was a very safe place then, very livable. There was people who, it was an enclave. I mean, in a lot of ways, we were forced to be here, but we made it a great place. We don't want to stand in the way of change. We don't want to stand in the way of progress, but I think it's really important that there's a balance, that we don't lose what is so important about this particular community. And I used to work on the Heritage Committee for Vancouver, and I remember thinking it's so often we don't appreciate what we have until it's too late. So I could see this with Chinatown, how the change was coming, but how do we try and manage it in a way that it's change that we actually want to have? 3 years ago, sort of thinking about this exact issue, I formed a foundation called the Vancouver Chinatown Foundation to bring in some of the people that, how could I get some, I won't say outsiders, but some of these great minds who have solved some of these social issues in our community to come together and figure out how can we revitalize Chinatown without sacrificing or losing our cultural heritage of the community, because to me that was the most important thing to save. So I was very lucky. I got, my father, who's Bob Lee, agreed to come on board, and how could we come together and come up with a big picture vision of what would we like to see in the next 10 or 20 years in Chinatown. And I think what is so different about Chinatown versus, let's say, a Richmond or Burnaby is that this community has a soul. It has a soul, and it's something that money cannot buy. You cannot buy history. It's just like no money can buy you cultural history. We have a century worth of history in Chinatown. So this is something that I think if we can work collectively, your question was, how is this going to work with this gentrification? And I think that even within my own family, we have discussions and disagreements on, more density, how much density. I don't mind having density as long as it's not at the expense of losing what I think is so important about Chinatown. Chinatown has a soul, and I think it's so important that we preserve it. So that's the motivation of really why I'm down here.
Calvin Louis, recognized as a business luminary, is the president and CEO of Li Q Importing Company, a third-generation business that had its start in Chinatown. Li Q exports Asian and Pacific-based products providing food, health, beauty aids, and pharmaceuticals to retail companies across Canada and beyond our borders.
Yeah, when I was small, that was the place I was taken by my parents, my grandparents, to be dropped off to be at our retail store at that time it was 256 East Pender, and I would be dropped off there to be to wander in the store, and there was like free babysitting for my parents, and they would head down to Army, Navy, and Woodward's, and then they would come back later to get me, and then before we would have our dinner down there. Since we had a supermarket, Chinese supermarket there, they would just get the ingredients off the shelf and then barter trade with some of the produce people, meat people, and then we would have our meal there. Chinese New Year, they would always bring us there, and we would go on the second floor, and we were able to see the lion and dragon dance from there. And also because we were a Chinese and Asian products company, we had a permit to bring in firecrackers. So my Uncle Alex and my Uncle Henry and my dad Victor would just bring up a couple of crates of firecrackers and allow us kids to light them off to ward off the evil spirits and welcome the lion and the dragon in for the Chinese New Year. Although we lived and worked in Chinatown during the most of the weekends, we actually lived outside of Chinatown on 23rd Avenue off of Oak Street. And it was, I guess we were maybe the only Chinese family that was in that area. And when I was like 3 or 4, I'd always hear these comments of, "Go back to Chinatown." I said, "Yeah, I'm going there on the weekend." But little did I know that there was actually a derogatory mark. But because I didn't understand the implication of it, I just said, "Yeah, I'm going there." And then the guy said, "Yeah, go there." I said, "Thank you." Right? Later on, as I grew up, I knew what that meant, but that was something else that my dad and my Uncle Alec, my Uncle Henry taught us, that just be the person, do the best you can, and what more can you ask than that? Yeah, with Uncle Alex, it was always like he'd always be pushing us to do the best we could. Whatever we did, if it was academic or some type of sports thing or anything to do with competition, he was there. Yeah, we started off as a import grocery store for the people in Chinatown. The name of our company is Li Q, and in Chinese it means benefit for the overseas Chinese. So we were from a particular clan in the southern part of China called Zhongshan, or Middle Mountain, or where the famous revolutionary Sun Yat-sen came from. So all our clan members came from there, and it was quite natural for my grandfather to open the shop there, and it was like a meeting place for all the people from all our clans. So, and at the same time, we could sell them groceries and do a little bit of commerce with them, and refer them to jobs and just networking as well. So we were at 256 East Pender for the longest time, and then in the 1967, I think, my Uncle Henry and my Uncle Alex and my dad Victor decided to modernize the way things were sold and open a supermarket-style Chinese supermarket at 262 East Pender. And that's how the business made its next generation into becoming one of the first modern supermarkets. And I guess basically at that time it was a specialty food store. There's demand for Canadian-style or American-style Asian products. So it's like the products that we make here, maybe there's a market for them, so we can actually sell Chinese food to China. Yeah, I like our Thai sweet chili sauce. It's a very sort of appealing for anyone with any type of palate. It's sweet, and then at the same time it's spicy, and it goes not only with Asian cooking, but you can use it for French fries or hamburgers or even for barbecuing. And just recently we introduced a sriracha mayonnaise from all the hype created by Subway with their sandwiches. So now we have a sriracha mayonnaise under the Asian Family brand as well. Yeah, I'd like to leave the legacy of the company for the next generations, as did my father and his brothers. So now that we're no longer a retail store, we decided to make a conscious direction into being an agent and a wholesaler and distributor representing different brands, mainly from the Asia Pacific. with the influx of all the Asians coming into Canada, because of my grandfather's contacts in the Southeast Asian region, like the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Burma, India, and Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, of course, mainland China. This network was built up since the 40s, and we've been able to revive and maintain some of these contacts. And now we're importing products from all over that Asia-Pacific region. But at the same time, we know that to be competitive, and if we can, we like to support Canadian-produced products. So we actually make some of our products here in Canada as well, just to balance off the mix that we have. And only if we can make the product more competitive in Canada, and at the same time if it meets demands as well.
Every city needs a visionary like David Choi, President and CEO of Royal Pacific Realty. David and his partners sold upwards of $6.3 billion worth of real estate in 2011. Renowned and highly decorated with awards and honors for his volunteer and humanitarian work, Chinatown is where his connections first began.
Yes, I remember very vividly my first trip to Chinatown was the entire family going there for our first dinner in Canada. We had just arrived that day from Hong Kong, immigrated to Canada by way of Vancouver. And the first dinner was in Chinatown. I remember arriving in Chinatown as a 9-year-old kid. It was like arriving in some form of cultural playland, reminding me parts of Hong Kong because of the neon lights of the restaurants and seeing Chinese characters. It was a November winter night, and we went to a restaurant called Ho Ho. Why Chinatown was then the magnet of the Chinese community is because of food. It was the place of family gatherings, dinners with friends, and also at least once a week, Chinese families would go shopping for groceries there, if not more often. This is the place where they would buy their live fish, live chicken, very similar eating habits for shopping groceries as in Hong Kong, or whether they came from Taiwan or other places in Asia. A week after I arrived in Vancouver, I had my first meeting with Dr. David Lam, who was then the president of the Hong Kong Merchants Association. That's because the members met once a week on Wednesday in the basement of a restaurant called Wai Yan to talk business and have dim sum. And the reason that I was there as a kid was because I was waiting to be admitted to school on a weekday, and my father brought me there. And I was the only minor in the group. But years after, Dr. Lam became the Lieutenant Governor of BC. And I think the entire Chinese community, not only in the BC, but in Canada, was very excited. Well, I've been very lucky to work in the real estate industry because I graduated out of University of British Columbia in commerce and urban economics. So naturally, I have a natural affinity of wanting to be licensed. After my graduation, I actually worked in Hong Kong for about 6.5 years in Hong Kong and China. So when I returned, real estate was a natural. Having grown up in Vancouver and knowing Dr. David Lam, and he was in real estate, and seeing the real estate that he has done in Chinatown and outside of Chinatown, and how there was a natural connection with Hong Kong immigrants' interests and Taiwan immigrants' interests in real estate, and having the academic background to do it, that was a natural for me to be in real estate. And I was very lucky to have that network and the connections and to know the people. And both having worked in Hong Kong after graduation and knowing the industry since a kid, and also knowing actually the geography of Vancouver. What Chinatown offered to me, my family, and other Chinese immigrants alike, it was the one place where it offered the cultural comfort a so-called, not just as a symbolism, but they felt it was a home away from home, where they can touch on the same cultures that they have left. It flowed out of Chinatown. And today, the Chinatown on the one end seems diminishing because there are Chinese establishments, including food establishments, we see everywhere in Greater Vancouver. And that's because of the demand and the pressure put on Chinatown, that entrepreneurs very quickly saw there's opportunities outside of Chinatown. And look at what has happened to Vancouver today. And so this is the Chinatown where I think that poses both development challenges and tremendous heritage opportunities, and is recognized at by the three levels of government. On the federal level, Chinatown has been declared a historical area of Canada. So I think that has yet to be realized its full potential. On the provincial level, obviously, with the province recognizing the importance of harmony and reconciling with its history, with the recent apology on discrimination in the past. And then on the city, the support has been tremendous, because whether you look at our heritage laws in preservation, protecting historical buildings, and the city making effort year after year, and the ongoing discussions about the renewal of Chinatown. So I think there are tremendous opportunities yet in Chinatown, and for all Vancouverites alike.
Art and beauty are personified by award-winning former prima ballerina and national ballet star Chan Hong-go. Her successful 20-year career garnered her international acclaim as both a ballerina and author. She is a busy mother, entrepreneur, and director of Go Ballet Academy.
I was faced with so much change when I first arrived in Vancouver. It was in the late 70s. I was 8 years old, didn't speak a word of English, and hadn't seen my dad for a year because that's how long it took for my mom and I to get our paperwork to come to Vancouver. I remember very fondly when my aunt and uncle took our newly immigrated family to Chinatown. It was probably on a weekend, and one of my first memories is seeing Chinese characters, signs in Chinese characters, and seeing that there were Chinese movie theaters, Chinese restaurants, but in the city of Vancouver, in a western city. I come from Beijing, where they speak Mandarin. And in the late 70s, the predominant Chinese dialect was Cantonese. And so even though people were of Chinese origin coming to see if they could help us what we wanted from the menu, I couldn't understand what they were saying. So that was unexpected. And Cantonese is very different to Mandarin. You know, coming from a family of artists, art was so dominant growing up. My parents both were principal dancers with the National Ballet of China, and my aunt and uncle had their careers in the West, with my aunt in England and Australia, and my uncle mostly in the United States. It was the training and it was the ballet that really took my heart. And now that I look back, I wonder if it had anything to do with the fact that when I came, I had to pick up a brand new language, English. I started from my ABCs, you know, from being a A student in grade 2 in Chinese academic school, where, you know, you had loads of homework every night. The math was very advanced already, to coming here and really being at the bottom of my class because I couldn't understand. But in dance, dance was something that I was so familiar with. And when I went into dance class and I could express through dance, that was such a pleasure and such a rewarding experience for me, how I could be someone other than myself in dance. And that was such an allure to be able to achieve and to really personify the music that I was hearing. When I became a principal dancer, I started to realize that other than having my body as my instrument, the next most important thing to any dancer is footwear. And that is really something that we're very dependent on. You know, you're working with various different surfaces and different hardness of the stage, and the only thing, I mean, a performer, especially classical dancers, ballerinas, you think of a ballet dancer and you think of pointe shoes right away. So I was having some injuries to my feet, and I started to think, why am I getting reoccurring injuries, and what a long struggle it is when you have to take time off to rehabilitate. I had access to some of the most knowledgeable consulting doctors in Toronto that I worked with as a part of the National Ballet, that were a part of the Olympic Committee. And so they provided me such valuable information that I thought, we've got to start a new design. We've got to make the pointe shoe better. We've got to provide more support for the longevity of dancers' health. And so that stimulated me to then work with my husband, who's a former dancer himself, and we started our own designs based on this principle of incorporating health science into the shoes.
Chinatown to this day is still the go-to destination of choice for great restaurants, shopping, and cultural landmarks such as Sun Yat-sen Gardens and the Chinese Cultural Center. Vancouver's Chinatown is a sought-after tourist attraction and a popular destination for all Canadians.